Hello and welcome to Mining 901, by far Africa's lightest podcast where we focus on mining topics. And today I'm glad to introduce an amazing team from Beech Veltman, one of South Africa, if not Africa's leading legal firms. I've got three directors who will shortly introduce themselves. We've got Chantal Murdock, we've got Mr. Bryan White, we also have Mr. Eben van Zyl. As always, I'm your host, Avhurengwi Nengovhela, and I've been in the mining sector for just over 2 decades. But to kick us off, I'll ask maybe Chantal just to tell us who you are, your role within Beech Veltman.
Thanks, Avhurengwi. Thank you very much for having us here today. So I'm Chantal. I'm a director at Beech Veltman, and I specialize in the commercial and regulatory aspects of mining. So your big mining transactions where you're buying and selling a mine, that's where I play.
Morning, Avhurengwi, to you and to the viewers as well. I'm Eben van Zyl, a partner at Beech Veltman. I specialize in mine health and safety, occupational health and safety, and really everything that comes in between as well. I have a particular fondness of the mine health and safety component of it. Been doing it for the past 13 years, so that's my sweet spot.
Great, thanks, Avhurengwi. Thank you for having us. My name's Bryan White. I'm the junior member of the Beech Veltman team, the most junior partner. I have a focus on dispute resolution.
Great, welcome. You say junior member. I saw Rising Star. So for those who are more curious, you can Google Bryan for more information. I think we were all at the Mining Indaba recently. I'm curious to maybe hear from you what your thoughts were.
Okay, thanks so much, Avhurengwi. So from my perspective, one of the key things that I kept my ear to the ground on was really what's happening in terms of investor confidence into Africa, the opportunities, concerns around regulatory issues and things of that nature. One thing is for sure, Africa is open for business. That was a key element that came through in many of the discussions that were had. Obviously with that though comes, if I can say, some cautious optimism. So what I mean by that is, in as much as everybody's open for investment, which is fantastic, from an investor perspective, there's always concerns around, is there certainty in the regulations and the policies of the African countries? That was, my take on it, and one of the key aspects that was discussed just generally, in relation to policy and decision making.
I can only agree. Like when I reflect on sort of maybe when you look back at the last 10 years of Mining Indaba, the feeling that I got personally this year was one of rising confidence. There are still gaps in terms of regulatory certainty, but one got the feeling that there is sort of the playing fields are being leveled, and it feels like there is some confidence that's coming back to the sector. Okay, if we maybe come back to Eben, what were your reflections? How did you experience the Indaba?
Lots of interesting discussions, attended interesting panel discussions. Of course, health and safety is a focal point. The mining industry celebrating the fact that we are making great strides in achieving that objective of zero harm at the end of the day. Not there yet, but getting there. As part of that, though, then the interesting discussions around health and safety management systems. How do we achieve the zero harm and the safety? But then also acknowledging that gender-based violence and femicide features and should feature as part of the mine's health and safety management system. That GBVF, as it's called, ultimately is a safety issue in the mining industry, and that it is something that the industry should tackle and most certainly include in its current systems to try to eliminate this scourge. It's not just the issue in the mining industry, of course, it's a global issue currently that's plaguing society, but how the industry as such should go about in ultimately taking steps, positive steps in addressing these types of issues in the working place.
Yeah, and it's a difficult issue. And we'll unpack the GBV component a bit more after we maybe hear about Bryan's reflections.
I think from one thing that I got out of Indaba, and definitely all the side chats and discussions at Indaba, was the role of critical minerals, and how there is an increased global demand for critical minerals. I mean, just last year, the South African government released its critical mineral strategy. So it's good to see that our government is at least aware of the increased demand for critical minerals. Not that there hasn't been a demand, but it's definitely on the rise.
Yeah, I can only concur with your reflections on the critical minerals bit. We have a strategy of South Africa. There are a few countries on the continent, such as Zambia, who have also done the same. And globally, you have Australia, Canada, China. It is important for a jurisdiction to be clear on what is critical for its own economy. There's a debate on the list, but my personal take is lists are geography dependent. But maybe Chantal, again, I'll come to you just to reflect on some of the trends that you think are emerging from an MPRDA perspective. Was there something that you observed at the Indaba?
Definitely, Avhurengwi. So at the moment, there's discussions about the MPRDA being amended. And so last year, about the middle of the year, the minister published his intended amendments to the MPRDA. People had an opportunity to comment on that, on those amendments, but the amendments haven't yet come in. And one of the important things, or one of the key things that came through in a lot of the discussions, was the requirement for beneficiation. So currently, in terms of the MPRDA, there is a requirement that there must be beneficiation, but the amendments presuppose that the minister may promulgate regulations in his discretion for mandatory beneficiation. So there is some concern around that, because what will it actually mean? What will the requirements mean? Will it mean that investors have to first upgrade their product that they mine here before they can export it to the country that they ultimately need it in? So there's conversations, very interesting conversations around that requirement, what it will mean, how those regulations will look, if we will have an opportunity to comment on those regulations, etc. With that, obviously, comes the concern that there is regulatory uncertainty around this aspect. How will it affect our investments, things like that. One of the, and it gives rise to an interesting debate in South Africa. Can beneficiation be done here in an effective manner? What about the cost of services? What about the cost of electricity? What about the cost of setting up the infrastructure that you need? In some of the panel discussions that we heard, we heard interesting viewpoints about how the best chocolate in the world is not made where the cocoa beans grow. It's made somewhere else. And that's just generally, interesting conversations that we had around that. So I definitely think that that is going to be a topic for the next year or two. What is beneficiation? How it looks in South Africa? What will the requirements be? And financially, what will the implications of that be for businesses that are currently operating or want to operate? Yeah.
Maybe if you can expand a bit more on how an investor will look at it. And beneficiation is an interesting conversation because, yes, government is pushing for more beneficiation, but we're seeing everywhere smelters, for example, shutting down. I'm wondering if you have a view on how investors are maybe thinking about this, or it is being impacted by some of these developments.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a big thing. I mean, so, similarly to what you said earlier, depending on the country that you're in, that ultimately determines what your requirements are, right? So if you are an investor from China looking to invest in South Africa, one of the key things that they look at is, okay, how much is it going to cost us if we have to develop a new smelting plant, a new smelting operation? Or how much is it going to cost us to purchase one, upgrade one, get all the regulatory approvals, get all the authorizations in place, versus if I can take that mineral as it is in its raw state, as it's mined out the ground, and I can export it. Yes, obviously, paying all relevant taxes, etc. And I can take it to my already developed infrastructure in China, how does that look? So it's conversations like that where obviously, depending on the country that you're coming from, China as the example being used, you may be a little bit cautious to want to invest massive amounts of money when you don't know what the requirement for the beneficiation is going to be. So that's really, where we are at the moment. So I think what we might see is investment being super increased over the next couple of years while we do have a little bit of while we do have a little bit of certainty within the regulatory framework, followed by potentially a downscaling, waiting for what the minister's beneficiation requirements are going to be.
I was reading the Canadian critical mineral strategy, and in there, call them complaints or some of the considerations that the government is having to contend with is beneficiation. They have the view that, no, we can't keep sending material to China for beneficiation. So government is now calling on the mining sector to play a more active role, which is interesting because when you're in South Africa, you think, oh, this is such a local issue. And yet it is not, because most of the beneficiation seems to be concentrated in China. Maybe let's switch gears a bit and come to Eben. What trends, if there were any, do you pick up from the conversations that happened at the Indaba?
So again, focusing on the gender-based violence issue, it is clear that industry recognizes that it's an issue. The Chief Inspector of Mines issued a guideline in 2024 on the management of GBVF in mines. The problem at the end of the day that the employer, the owner of the mine, faces is that essentially sections 2 and 5 of the Mine Health and Safety Act say you need to ensure a safe and healthy working environment, an environment that is safe and without risk. How does the employer achieve that when we're focusing on gender-based violence issues that are prevalent in the working place? And what I've found is that while employers have systems in place to deal with such issues, buddy systems for female employees in certain working areas and so on and so forth, it is almost as if it stops when the people leave the gate. Safety shouldn't stop, not just GBVF, safety in general shouldn't just stop when employees go back out of the gate. So a lot of the discussion centered around the fact that we need to do more in the communities as well, to educate our people and our communities on GBVF, what constitutes GBVF in general. I've presented a number of workshops with another partner in our firm, Melanie Hart, who's our labor specialist. And what we have seen is that it is extremely interesting that a number of the attendees attending these workshops, senior people, junior people alike from the mines, don't really understand, but what is GBVF? What type of behavior constitutes GBVF, and why is it actually a problem in the industry? Why is it a problem in the working place? I can train you on what the consequences will be in the working place if you fall foul of the mine's rules and procedures regarding this. But by the same token, if you don't understand why your behavior should change, changing it in the community when you come back through the gate, when you leave the gate again, we're going to have a battle that can't be won. So in essence, what needs to happen is the mine needs to focus on training and coaching its people as part of their training systems, its health and safety management systems, yes, but we also need to do more by reaching out to the communities and engaging with them at a community level to help them understand why this is critical. Why is it a safety issue? All employees without failure can cite Section 22 of the Mine Health and Safety Act. Employees' duties for health and safety. I'm responsible for my own health and safety. I'm responsible for the health and safety of others, my brother, sister's keeper. But understanding then that my behavior from a GBVF perspective directly impacts on that obligation.
So there are maybe two things that are standing out for me at least. The conversation at a community level. I also like the idea of, you mentioned a gate, but I'm thinking of it as both a physical feature, but also a virtual feature in the sense that you want someone to move from the community to the mine. There should not be a gate in terms of how they are thinking about these matters. It's really good that as Beech Veltman, you engaging the employees at a community level. Otherwise, you have this employee will behave differently at work, and when they're home, they behave differently, which is not something you want. Absolutely. And maybe let me turn to you, Bryan, to just get your view from a risk management perspective, which is part of the work that you do. When you link that to the Mining Indaba and the general state of the industry, how should maybe mining executives be thinking about risk or risk management specifically?
I think one of the key is linking it back to critical minerals is that with all the with the increased demand and with the different role players who are suddenly, not suddenly interested in critical minerals, but more interested in critical minerals, you've got a breeding ground for disputes. You've got investors, you've got private companies that are chasing after critical minerals. You've got governments, like you said, you've got Canada with their strategy, the US with their strategy. I mean, there was a big contingent at the Indaba, and quite a few discussions about the US critical mineral strategy. Like I said, when you have all these different role players, everyone's fighting for their piece of the pie. And, it's a breeding ground for potential disputes. I think mining companies, from a risk management perspective and just getting into these commercial transactions and whatever, one of the very interesting discussions we had with the International Chamber of Commerce was just about the role of alternative dispute resolution in mining contracts. And I think we're going as mining entities that having strong arbitration clauses in your commercial agreements and looking to strong alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. I think mining companies should look at right from the get-go when they enter into their contracts, their contracts to supply these critical minerals or whatever minerals they're supplying. They should be looking at building strong arbitration clauses, strong alternative dispute resolution clauses, just as a means of, in South Africa, particularly keeping out of court.
Yeah. I actually want to add on to what Bryan is saying. So, when it comes to the commercial side of things, and what we've seen is you can have a strange set of facts. So for example, you can have a situation where you are a South African mining company, obviously with South African licenses. You supply your minerals to a company in China, but you've got to export it through a separate country, through Africa. You then end up in a dispute with a contractor who supplies their product or is rather a registered entity from Canada, as an example. So the question then comes in, what rule of law actually applies in this bizarre situation? You've got all sorts of different entities, all sorts of different licensing requirements, etc. And that builds on to what Bryan is saying. When you actually have if we can say a dispute resolution mechanism that cuts out all of that complicated noise, it really does make it easier to resolve disputes, and it presents an opportunity for people to get those disputes resolved expeditiously, as opposed to trying to go through our South African court system, which at the moment is significantly backlogged.
Yeah, and I think one of the really good discussions we had at Indaba with the International Chamber of Commerce was just the importance of using these international bodies to resolve disputes. And for example, last year Chantal had a fight with one of her clients had a fight where they were South African, the other side was sitting in China, and their arbitration clause was out of Singapore.
Yeah.
It was so messy, and one of the reasons was because it was a poorly drafted arbitration clause. So I think just, from the get-go, getting those clauses right from your commercial agreements, right from inception, will save you a lot of money and time down the line.
I'm starting to get a really good sense of why a potential client will engage with Beech Veltman. Sort of as I'm listening to the different perspectives, it's clear that there is always this help that you provide that the industry needs. And having been in the South African mining industry for a long time, what you realize, which is a truism in our industry, is whatever gets produced in the world, there are only two ways to do that. It's either you mine it or you farm it. So conversations around mining are conversations that we'll continue to have, particularly in a country where 6 to 8% of our GDP still comes from the mining sector. Something that comes to mind that you maybe want to share?
Well, I think just to add on to the discussion about alternative dispute resolution, and Chantal briefly touched on it, in our courts, it's a reality all lawyers know it. In our courts at the moment, you can sit, waiting for 3 or 4 years just to get a court date. We had last year, I think in November, December, or let's just say the latter half of last year, we had two quite big matters that we managed to sort out in a private arbitration. But the alternative, is that you sit in courts and you wait for 10 years for a resolution for something, and it's just, we've got to focus more on our alternative dispute resolution.
And it's interesting, some courts are also now implementing a mandatory mediation process. And why that becomes interesting from Bryan's perspective is, why don't we just agree to this in the commercial contract from the beginning?
Part of me, what I'm thinking is, when I walk through the door at Beech Veltman, what can I expect as a potential client? What sort of experience can one expect? What makes Beech Veltman the special firm that it is today?
I think all of the partners and our associates, even our candidate attorneys, are well experienced specialists in their respective areas. And if you come to Beech Veltman, most certainly from a mining perspective, mining commercial, mining regulatory, mining health and safety, labor, whatever it may be, there will be somebody that's an absolute specialist in that area that will be able to properly service your needs, properly address the issue with appropriate experience.
Yeah.
We all sort of been in this industry for some time now. And our CEO of the firm is Warren Beech. He's been, an iconic figure for 30 years in the industry. He started his career on a mine, literally on a mine. He wasn't always a lawyer. And, that's sort of having that sort of point of reference, Eben going to the mines, speaking to their employees, speaking to their communities. One of the things that we always try to sort of put forward is advice that is practical and responsive at the same time. Generally speaking, we're not into the business of sending clients a 40-page opinion. Normally, the client just wants to know, can I do this? If I can't do this, what can I do? And, we try to keep our advice specifically to our mining clients practical. Can they implement it? How fast can they implement it? Can it result in the objective that they're looking for? And especially from a health and safety perspective, where Eben is, playing in at the moment, he specifically is, presenting these matters on GBF because it is such a big thing, and it is actually playing such a significant role in the industry, in labor disputes, in health and safety issues, etc.
And maybe to add, I think what makes us special as well, we're not afraid to get our hands dirty. We go out to the mines. We sit with the management teams. We sit with the employees. I think we've got a very good understanding of the practical issues that they face. It's very easy to just stare at the law and then give advice purely based on what you see there. But I think we also have a very good understanding of the ins and the outs at the operation that you need to take into consideration when considering any matter.
Yeah. And I can attest to that, having had the pleasure of engaging with Beech Veltman for many, many years. I can attest to the fact that you do get your hands dirty, that the opinion, when it does come through, is not a 40-page document. This has been Mining 901, a conversation with Beech Veltman, a conversation on different aspects. The details for Beech Veltman will be at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have an issue that you feel that Beech Veltman will be able to partner with you to get the matter resolved, you know where to find them. As always, I'm Avhurengwi Nengovhela, and thank you for tuning in Till next time, take care.